My name is Sloane Mercer. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of the weekend that changed everything. It happened on a Friday night. I was folding laundry in my apartment when the pain hit, sharp, sudden, like a blade sliding between my ribs every time I tried to breathe. Within seconds I was on the floor, gasping, unable to pull air into my lungs no matter how hard I fought for it. My first instinct was to call my mother. That's what you do when you're terrified and 28 and some part of you still expects your mother to drop everything. She didn't pick up. I called again, nothing. On the third try, she answered, and I could hear spa music drifting behind her voice, that soft, tinkling piano they play while you're getting a hot stone massage. Sloane, honey, I'm at the retreat. Can this wait until Sunday? Her voice was light, untroubled, as if I hadn't just told her I couldn't breathe. I said it again, slower, that something was seriously wrong, that my chest felt like it was folding in on itself. She sighed, the sigh she used when she thought I was being dramatic, and said, I already paid for the whole weekend package. I can't just leave. Then she hung up. I called an ambulance myself. I crawled to unlock my front door so the paramedics wouldn't have to break it down when I passed out, which I very nearly did, twice, before they arrived. By the time I reached the emergency room, my right lung had fully collapsed, a spontaneous pneumothorax, the doctor called it. Rare for someone my age. Not impossible, especially under stress. They put a chest tube in right there in the trauma bay. No time to wait for family. No time to wait for anyone. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them to keep my mind off the pain, while a nurse held my hand because there was no one else there to hold it. My father had died 3 years earlier. My mother, my only living parent, was 40 minutes away, getting a seaweed wrap. She finally showed up Sunday evening, 2 full days later, in a plush white spa robe under her coat, like she hadn't bothered to change before driving over. She walked into my hospital room holding a gift bag of lavender bath products, as if I'd been on a wellness retreat too. You look better than I expected, she said, glancing at the tube still taped to my side. I didn't have the energy to argue. I watched her set the bag on the nightstand, check her phone, and ask the nurse when visiting hours ended, because she wanted to make it back for the closing dinner. That was the moment something in me went quiet and cold, a switch flipping somewhere deep in my chest that had nothing to do with the collapsed lung and everything to do with finally seeing her clearly. I spent 5 more days in that hospital, learning to breathe deeply again without wincing. In that time, my mother visited exactly once more, for 20 minutes, mostly to talk about how stressful the whole ordeal had been for her. Lying there with tubes running out of my body, I finally let myself understand something I'd spent my whole adult life avoiding. I had been making excuses for her for years. Telling myself she loved me in her own way. That some people just weren't built for crisis. But watching her sip herbal tea from a to-go cup while I struggled to sit upright taught me something I couldn't unlearn. She wasn't built for me. Not really. Not ever. 3 weeks after I was discharged, a letter arrived, forwarded from my father's old attorney, marked urgent and personal. He'd left instructions that it only be opened under specific circumstances, and apparently a medical emergency involving my mother's absence qualified. I sat at my kitchen table, still tender around my ribs, and opened an envelope that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my family. Inside was a single folded page in my father's careful handwriting. At the top, underlined twice, were words that made my hands go cold: property, trust, and one condition my mother had never known existed. I read the first line 3 times before I could make myself keep going. Because if it was true, my mother was about to lose far more than a spa weekend. His words rose off the page like he was sitting across from me again. He wrote that he'd watched her for over 20 years, quietly, patiently, noting every time she chose herself over me. Every recital skipped, every school play she claimed to forget, every small failure of attention I'd learned to explain away as just how she is. He never confronted her while he was alive. He didn't want to break our family apart while I was still growing up. But he'd built a safeguard, just in case the pattern ever became something worse than missed recitals. The house I grew up in. The lake property in Vermont. The bulk of his investment portfolio. None of it had actually gone to my mother outright, it had been placed in a trust, administered by his attorney, Weston Vale, with one condition attached. If my mother ever failed to show up for me during a documented medical emergency, everything would transfer to me, immediately and irrevocably, with her left only a small monthly stipend. I called Weston the next morning, my voice still raw from the hospital. He confirmed all of it, calm and steady, almost like he'd been waiting 3 years for that exact phone call. He told me my father had drafted the clause after a smaller incident when I was 22, when I'd had my appendix out and my mother went to a wine tasting instead of the hospital. My father never told me. He'd hoped it would never matter. Weston asked me to send the hospital records, the paramedic report, anything documenting my mother's response, or lack of one. I gathered it all within the week, the time-stamped call log showing her hanging up while I couldn't breathe, the admission paperwork with no family contact listed, the discharge summary noting I'd been accompanied only by hospital staff. It felt strange, almost cruel, building a case against my own mother. But every document felt less like betrayal and more like finally being believed. She found out 2 weeks later, when Weston's office sent formal notice that the trust conditions had been triggered. She called me screaming, her voice cracking in a way I'd never heard, not even when my father died. She can't just take everything. This is insane. Your father would never do this to me. I let her finish. Then I told her, as calmly as I could, that he hadn't done this to her. She'd done it to herself, one missed moment at a time, this had simply been the moment he'd chosen to matter. She showed up at my apartment that night, still in workout clothes, mascara streaked down her face, begging me to call the attorney and stop it. Telling me she loved me more than anything. That the spa weekend had been a mistake, that she'd take it all back if she could. I stood in my doorway, one hand resting over the healing scar on my ribs, and told her I believed she was sorry now. But sorry now didn't undo 2 days alone in a trauma unit with a collapsed lung and a gift bag of lavender soap. The trust finalized 6 weeks later. I moved into the lake house that spring, the same house where my father used to teach me to fish off the dock every summer before he got sick. I kept my mother's stipend intact, because despite everything, I wasn't interested in destroying her. Only in finally being protected the way a daughter should have been all along. She still calls sometimes. Late at night. Sometimes crying, sometimes defensive, occasionally almost gentle. I answer when I have the strength to, because healing isn't the same as forgetting, and I'm still figuring out which parts of her I'm willing to let back in. What I know is this, my father saw something in her that I was too close to see myself. And in his quiet, careful way, he made sure that even after he was gone, I would never again have to beg someone to show up for me. Now, every time I sit on that dock and watch the water go still at sunset, I think about how strange it is that the worst weekend of my life became the reason I finally learned to breathe, in every sense of the word. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, there are more stories like mine waiting for you here. Stories about the families who fail us, and the unexpected people who show up when it matters most. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.